Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of Super Psych.D, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psych.D is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Have you ever had the belief that you were only as good as your results at work? Perhaps if this is the case, you can identify with your work so much that if you aren't crushing it, you believe you're nothing. Of course, thinking about this rationally, we can all eventually come to recognize that we are more than our work, but on an emotional level, we can become so identified with our work that we can forget who we are. So here comes the big word, enmeshment. Enmeshment is an experience that many of us have interpersonally when we are so identified with a relationship that we can actually forget who we are. This often happens with parent and child, where the parent basically says, if you are my child and part of this family, you must be this or do that. And this exact dynamic can show up at work. I'm so grateful to my colleague and new friend, Dr. Janna Koretz, a psychologist in Cambridge, Massachusetts, who has written extensively about enmeshment as it pertains to work. Janna is a licensed psychologist who, like me, serves high-achieving individuals who may come to over-identify with their work. Her article in the Harvard Business Review caught my eye, and I knew I had to interview her. When you listen in, you'll hear why. It turns out that over-identifying with our role at work can have very toxic effects. Janna talks about these and ways to navigate our own internal trappings that cause this and how we can continue to excel without suffering the toxic effects of enmeshment. So listen in as Janna and I talk about enmeshment at work. Dr. Janna Koretz, who has asked me to call her Janna, welcome to Super Psych.D.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
I just have to give my listeners a little bit of our backstory. I'm sitting on a Saturday reading the Harvard Business Review article that you wrote, and I just thought to myself, wow, here's a kindred spirit. She does something so similar to what I do. And I immediately called you, left you a voicemail, and wanted you on the podcast. I just fell in love with your writing, the way you have handled the topic of enmeshment, which we are going to geek out to together. And I am so happy to have you as a bi-coastal colleague and to be able to share your thoughts with my listeners.
Yes, thank you. I know. I was so happy to hear from you. And once I looked up a little bit more about what you were up to, I knew we were going to have a great conversation. So I'm excited.
Right on. So let's just even the playing field. Let's describe what is enmeshment and how does it relate to work? Some of us may be familiar with it as a concept from Salvador Minuchin in family therapy, but you have very brilliantly found a way to make it be a known entity in the workplace environment.
Yes.
What is it?
It's a similar concept. So it's when someone's identity becomes one with something else, is how I understand enmeshment. So the way we understand enmeshment usually is in the concept of relations to others, right? So two people's identities are sort of converged into one and they can't have individuation, things like that. So when we apply it to work, and what we see in our work is people have that with their work and their profession, their career, where that's what they are, which in and of itself is not necessarily bad. But oftentimes because it's all your eggs are in that one basket, it becomes very problematic for people. And there always comes a time where that catches up with them, whether it be when their company is sold, they miss a promotion, their spouse gets very upset because they are missing things at home, a variety of different factors.
I'm thinking about kind of a work widow, and I'm even thinking about the notion, and of course it could go either way. It could be widower or widow, but I'm even thinking about the notion of pronouns. And when the concept of we, which I think ideally, if somebody's in a family, sure, we, but there's also got to be room for I. And sometimes what we see, I think, in the workplace environment is the pronoun we for everything, rather than almost forgetting that I am an I within this we.
Yes. And that can be part of the cultural problem as well. It is a fine line. I mean, I own a business. I know you want people to be themselves, but also be a team player. And you want to respect their time and space and their own personal requirements and things that they have going on in their personal lives, but also have them be at work and do things on time and things like that. And I think it is a very fine line to combine those two hats for sure.
And while I think it's probably intuitive to the listener, I'm still going to ask, why is it so important to identify enmeshment at the workplace? What are the possible toxic side effects in one's life?
I think one that we see the most is almost a loss of anything else, right? People kind of wake up one day, they realize they might have wanted to have a partner, they might have wanted to have kids or still want to have kids. They realize that they have not been on their bike in 12 years. They just are missing out on other things and they don't know how to understand that. And they don't know what to do about that. And they don't know. And a lot of that comes from where they have come from, right? You've spent so much time checking the boxes to get where you are. You've worked so hard. You spent that time. And a lot of people do like their job too, right? They care about the work. And so it's a big conflict for people and they don't know how to integrate that information. And so that in and of itself is a problem. And then people get anxious, they become depressed, they start using substances more, they just feel bad. And that can take a lot of different turns depending on the person. And then that's when it becomes problematic for them.
Entirely. And that idea of losing oneself and forgetting who we are. And I suddenly fast forwarded in my mind to our going to get super morbid, but this is important. It's essentially on point. Our deathbeds. And what do we regret? We all know that none of us ever says, you know what, I should have shown up at work more, so to speak. But we might say that bicycle that I let rust in the garage, I got so much joy from being on that bicycle and I forgot about it. I forgot who I was. And I think about the relationship we share with the bicycle as a great metaphor for so many other things. It could be painting, it could be cooking, it could be anything. But those things fall by the wayside and they're parts, really dear parts of who we are. I'm wondering, what have you heard people lose track of and perhaps regain after they work with you around this issue?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting, right? Because we talk about the loss of self a lot for motherhood and fatherhood too, right? We do understand that concept a lot in motherhood, where people lose themselves into this huge endeavor that's really difficult on many levels. Fathers too, right? I think it's popular in a popular way. We talk about in the concept of mothers a lot more, but it happens to fathers too. But people don't, that's how they understand sort of losing themselves often. That's one major way people, but they don't consider that there are many other ways to lose yourself, so to speak, or lose your identity or get lost in other things. And work is a huge one because we spend so much time at work. We're expected to spend so much time at work. That becomes very problematic too. It's like people realize all sorts of things that they've liked. And it can be activities and hobbies like you're talking about, or it can be just going places or feeling grounded in themselves. You know, I think when people lose parts of themselves over time, they just feel very uncomfortable because from an existential perspective, they are missing part of themselves. And they know on some level that they're not all this one thing. There are many, many things and they can't find them. They don't know what they are. It is very uncomfortable. And it's not necessarily that loving your job or spending a lot of time at your job is bad, but it's all that they are. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're going to get into that. Of course, we're not in any way slamming the idea of loving our jobs. I think it's safe to say that you and I both love our jobs. But one of the things that I've noticed when I've worked with high achievers who really kind of forget who they are and become so much a part of their company that when I ask them for their opinions about something that it relates to their own lives or even what they want, like they could be a C-level individual who's constantly killing it in front of the most terrifying audiences. But when I ask them a simple question like, what do you want? They're dissociated. They have this difficulty. Actually, there are these long gaps between words and it's almost like they're stoned. It's just so hard for them. There could be the most articulate attorney in the world. And for whatever reason, they can't even make a coherent sentence when asked an ostensibly simple question. At least that's been my own experience. I don't know if that dovetails with yours.
Yeah, we definitely see that sometimes. And I think, they're so ingrained, like they're so into this one thing and they can do this one thing and they do it really, really well, but you're asking them to say something else in a different domain.
Exactly.
Spend a lot of time thinking about. What's so fascinating about all of this is we talk about all of these concepts across so many different things, right? We talk about loss of identity in motherhood. We talk about, loss of self after trauma, not being able to, like, you come back from a trauma feeling like you don't know who you are, like not feeling grounded, not being able to say, what is your favorite drink? You can't name that. but we don't apply it in situations like this.
One of the things, and as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about my interview with an expert on cults. And unwittingly, when we lose ourselves, it doesn't really matter what the domain is. There is a confluence of descriptors that I would use, like this lack of intersubjective awareness. Like there's no awareness that I have my own subjective experience. And
allowed.
Exactly.
And I think for a lot of clients, we see that they don't see it necessarily in the beginning, but that's happened to them. Some of them are from, it's a family of origin where they, parents could be immigrants. They are supposed to work very, very hard. There are a lot of requirements, things they're expected to do, or they come from just a family that pressures them into these certain careers and how to go to these certain schools and things like that. And so you do all the things, right? You check all the boxes, you do a really great job. But if that's not what you want, then you get to a place where you've quote unquote arrived, right? You have the C-suite job. You are working now as a lawyer. You're doing all these things, but like you're not happy with that. And that's confusing to people too, I think, because they're like, well, I did it. Here I am.
And there's something in cognitive dissonance theory that basically suggests that when we invest so much time in a thing, well, I'm a smart person. Therefore, if I'm experiencing the fruits of my labor now and I'm an intelligent person and this is what I did, it must have been for a good reason. It's almost like it's hard to disabuse ourselves of the idea that, yeah, actually something's amiss here. And maybe it requires a few little fixes. And I'm wondering for the listener who's listening and thinking, am I enmeshed at work? What are some signs that a person might be enmeshed in their work environment?
It's a question we get all the time and there's so many answers, but I think some useful ones that I think apply to a lot of people is if you meet someone at a party or anywhere, they say, oh, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do? And the only descriptors you can kind of come up with are about your job, your task at work, like what you're doing at work. That's kind of an indication. And as you described, if someone asks, what do you like to do? And you're not really sure. You're like, well, I'm at work all the time. And this happened to me too, because I moved to a new town like a few years ago and I met a lot of new people and they would ask me, oh yeah, like what do you do on the weekends? What do you do for fun? And at that time I was building my business on the weekends. And so I struggled to find something like more relatable to say, because in that moment I had been in school for a long time and I had started this company and I was working really hard at it. And it was just in a stage of that's what it needed. And as like things come up on the weekends for people, it's just not a 9-to-5 job. And I felt that in that moment. So I get where a lot of our clients are coming, where you're just, it's almost like startling. It's cooking. I like to cook. And like, you come up with something, but it's not like, I actually don't like to cook at all, So I think that those two questions are ways to sort of start the self-reflection process of, is this happening to me? But also it may not, again, be a problem. People feel very attached to work. And the people that I'm thinking of too are doctors. A lot of doctors are very attached to their work. They're attached to the science. They're attached to the patients. They're attached to saving lives. They're attached to all the hospital institution. There's so many things. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's when it becomes problematic in your life for other reasons, just like anything else, right? I mean, you can have manic tendencies, but until it gets in your way,
it could actually be serving. Like, wow, I was able to pump out a whole ton of work.
Right.
And I guess the question is, are those manic tendencies causing impairment in other areas? And I think that's probably what you're kind of driving at. Like, is an area of my life suffering? Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that can happen with drug abuse and any other potentially toxic behaviors is we can rationalize. Well, that's part of the job. This is kind of how it works. I'm wondering, what are some rationalizations a person might engage in when they were actually enmeshed?
Yeah, I mean, you can really rationalize anything. And I think what we do to kind of inquire about that, I'll say, and kind of know more about that is we do a lot of values work. And people, I don't think, even know what their values are, or they say a few things, but they haven't really thought about it, right? There's not a lot of space to think about it because we all know this, but I feel very strongly the culture that we live in does not promote wellness. I mean, there's certainly a movement towards that since I was little, but people are fighting about whether or not they should come into the office. People are not getting paid enough. People are told to work more hours. There's still a culture of working all the time, like constant working, and we don't get vacation time. Just all these things. And I think when the most recent tech boom happened, right, it's like Google had all the snacks. You could do yoga class there. You could do all the things, but that's just a way to get you to be there, right? And they're great benefits. Like I went to visit Google. My friend worked there for a long time and I was taking all the snacks in my backpack and, we went to a bunch of stuff and it was really great. It was super fun. But they just want you to be part of this culture of all the time. And the startup culture of finding the unicorn, working all the time. And I don't have to tell you this, right? your listeners know too, but it's like you'll get there. You just have to try harder. You have to work more. And that's not always true. So we try to give people the space to step back from that and think about what's important to them. And it could be anything. I think people will jump to family or community or things like that, but it could be money, it could be power, it could be all sorts of stuff. But until you know what it is, then you can't really orient yourself to what that means for you in terms of your life. And we have a tool that we create to help people with it that we're actually trying to make even better, because it's hard to know where to start. What is a value? And especially if you're kind of lost in the moment in yourself and you're not really sure and you don't feel like grounded in your identity, it's going to be very hard to even know that or start thinking about that.
And I like that idea of doing a gap analysis regarding our values, looking at our values, what they are, and asking myself, am I living according to those values? What is the gap here? And I've personally found, I believe it used to at least be connected to the University of Pennsylvania, the Values in Action, viacharacter.org, doing their free VIA character assessment and seeing how much am I living those. But I think most of us can recognize, like, do you value your friendships and how much time are you actually investing in those? Do you value travel and learning for the sake of learning and not just for the job? And for each of us, we have different rejuvenation quotas that need to be met. One of the things that I also see, and I imagine you do too, is that on the weekends, I don't know if the scenario resonates, but Saturday finally hits, the person goes for the low-hanging fruit because they're so exhausted. So what do? They go to Netflix, they binge watch something while on their device, texting, emailing, petting their dog, folding their laundry, drinking their coffee, and perhaps even who knows what else. And then they wonder when Monday rolls around, why am I not rejuvenated? Because I went for the easy stuff rather than the stuff that really rejuvenates me. I call that these things non-rejuvenating rabbit holes is kind of the term I've come to use. But I'm wondering if that's also something that you've experienced in your own clinical work.
Yeah, a little bit. I think we sort of see people, I wouldn't necessarily have thought of it as low-hanging fruit. I kind of like that you framed it that way. I see it almost as an automation, like these tasks that we're supposed to do. I mean, we're all guilty of binging.
Dude, totally. And by the way, I'm not slamming that. I do it myself. Yeah. It's just at the severe exclusion of all other things.
Right. No, I understand where you're coming from. But they're automated, right? It's easy. Like all these things are very easy. And like a lot of them you have to do, right? We have to fold our laundry. We have to get our groceries. We have to do all these things. And life becomes sort of like Saturdays, sort of almost chores, but we kind of want to tune out. So we put on Netflix. And tuning out is fine, but also you have to be plugged in, which I think is what you're saying. Plugged into things that rejuvenate you, that are about you and what you like. And I think we get lost in work and we get lost in the logistics of the weekend, whatever that means, in terms of doing tasks. And, not to say we won't also go out or something like that, but those pieces of supercharged pieces that you're talking about that are individual, those get lost because people don't know what they are, or they don't think they have time, or they're too tired, or they haven't had a chance to just really think about it. And then I think that's also part of burnout, is like the idea, even if you love to bike, let's say, the idea of finding your bike and getting it tuned and, then you got to find the shoes and like there's too much traffic on the street. It's like there's a lot of organization, and the initiation into that can feel very daunting if you are really burnt out from your life. So
it's so beautifully articulated. So let's go to the fix. Like, what are some things a person can do if they are beginning to nod as they're listening to this podcast thinking or someone I love is enmeshed at the workplace? What would be, first of all, what would be your recommended sequence that might be akin to smelling salts to bring people back to who they are from this kind of Rip Van Winkle-esque induced coma that can be enmeshment at the workplace?
I think there's two pieces that sort of have to happen simultaneously. So I do think the values piece is really important. I think people think they should be able to do that very quickly, but they can't, because it's about your identity. You have to sit and think about that. And also things have changed. People say, well, this used to be really important to me. And I ask, well, is it important now? And the answer can be no. You're older, things have changed, you have life experience, you have other responsibilities now, whatever it is, you don't have to have the same value. I mean, people think of value as core values that are stable over time, and often they are, but not always. Or you've learned a lot along the way, or something's happened to you and that has made you have a different perspective. And so taking the time to really think about that, I think, is really important. And that takes time, which people don't love. And then the other thing that I tell people to do that they also don't love is that, like, the small things are so important. I think a lot of our clients, they're such doers that when they want to, they're like, I'm going to start exercising again. I signed up for a marathon. I'm like, don't do that. Please don't do that, because that is such a huge commitment and they can do it. It's not that they can't do it, but if we're talking about long-term sustainable change, adding hours into your day of exercise is not actually what you need. What you need to do is if you have 20 minutes and there's a gym in your building, just go downstairs. It doesn't matter what you do and then come back upstairs and you're starting new habits. And your body will respond to that. Your mind will respond to that. Even yesterday, we had our therapy dog was on her visit and we ended up back at the office and whatever the timing was such that myself and Dr. Barry, we had like 50 minutes until whatever had to happen next. And she's like, should we go to lunch? Yeah, we can go to lunch.
We can.
She's like, we don't really have enough time. I'm like, listen, we have 50 minutes. So we can do this. It's the time we have, right? So that's kind of what I think about. It's the time you have. You have 20 minutes, put away half the dishwasher. It doesn't matter because over time, you're doing things differently, slowly. And all those little things combined make a big difference. And I think people in general, right? We all want sort of like a big sweeping solution. I want to do this and fix my problem, or I want to buy this and then things will be better. And that's just not how the world works. And so if you really want it to be different, you have to kind of get into the weeds and find those little details and find those places of subtle shifts. And I had a client who, while we're talking about Netflix, got lost in Netflix at nighttime, like we all do, right? After work, after dinner, whatever. I was staying up really late because that's what happens when you watch Netflix, right? You're still watching. Yes, I'm still watching. And then just decided, really wasn't finding time to connect with friends, their partner, whatever. Really hadn't read a book in a long time. Used to really like to read. And so she said, I'm just not going to watch TV like during the week, like one day. I'm going to see what happens. So like whatever, it's Tuesday. And she ended up like having a nice conversation with her spouse because they took like whatever amount of time to do that. And then she went to bed super early. She was like, well, I don't have any like super important tasks. So I'm going to go to bed. And she went to bed at like 9:00. And then she was like, it was great. I slept so much. The next day was so productive and like all these things. And so what she learned, right, is I can watch TV and I can also have days where I go to bed early or I don't do this or I do something differently and I can feel better. And that's really not that hard. And I don't have to do it all the time. And that's fine. That's like great. So the small piece, but nobody wants a small shift, right? They're almost harder in some ways.
And one of the things you're speaking to is, the hallmark of psychological well-being, which is cognitive flexibility. And you're trying to find cognitively flexible strategies to make things work, whether it's a 50-minute lunch or saying, I've only got 20 minutes and I can do part of the dishes. This piecemeal approach is so relevant. I power through 2 to 3 books a week on Audible, basically listening often in 15-minute increments. And I don't have like a 5-hour window to listen to a large portion of a book, but I do have these 15-minute increments. What happens over the course of a week? If I've made that a priority. I value learning, upgrading my software and firmware in my brain. And that's the way I can do it, given the constraints in my schedule. You're really speaking to that idea of like asking yourself, well, how do you rock this 50 minutes? How do you rock this 20 minutes? And maybe how do you implement small changes along the way, whether it's relating to sleep, just tiny behavioral changes along the way to get where you're trying to get. And I think that's really important for many of us who think in all or nothing like thinking.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally exactly what it is. And I think, we're all waiting for the time when we have time to do X. I'm waiting for the Saturday when I have time to clean out my garage, right? I'm waiting for after this to do this. I'm waiting till after this thing is due to do this other thing. And there's so much waiting. It's almost like you're not even living in the moment because you're waiting for this next thing to happen so you can do this other thing. But then there's just another thing, or you don't have that time. That time never comes because you're busy and other things are going on in your life. And you don't have that 5-hour block or 2-hour block, or even for work. When I'm writing, I don't have 2 hours to sit down and write something, which would ideally love. So I do it in these little spurts and it gets done and it's good and everything is fine in the end. But it's very hard to do that too, because people often also don't like to start things that they can't finish. There's something like you leave things undone. It doesn't feel great a lot, I think, but you're just doing it really slowly.
And I like that idea so much because it even dovetails with that great idea from Shawshank Redemption, where he says, we got to get busy living or we're getting busy dying. And I love that idea. You're kind of putting into action saying, listen, we got 50 minutes. That's an existential mandate. It's like, we've got 50 minutes. How are we going to crush it? Fantastic. Let's talk about healthy work. Like, what does that look like? I mean, you and I both love our jobs. You're not going out and saying work is bad. You're saying work in healthy doses is good. And I'm wondering, what does a healthy relationship with work look like from your perspective?
Well, I think it looks different for everyone, which is sort of in some ways the problem, right? Because you work in a company where there's 100 people that work there and everyone needs something slightly different. In the same way that the manager of those 100 people can't speak to them the same way because they don't all have the same communication styles. People are sensitive. They have whatever, like they have their own things. You have to talk to people differently and they need different things. And even in our company, which is pretty small, our clinicians need different things, like even in terms of benefits or time off or how they flex their schedules or whatever. So I think it's part of it is just figuring out what works for you. A lot of people will say, I drop my kids at school, I work for until this time, I pick them up, I do dinner, whatever. And then I work from like 8 to 11. And I love that schedule. It works for me. I can do all the things and that's how I'm most productive. And their company, they can do that. So I don't have a good answer because I think it is so individual, but I think that's part of the exploration of like, am I enmeshed? What are my values? How do I want to live? How do I want to do this? And people will come up with that, But I mean, typically it does not involve only working or working all the time or things like that.
And I'm going to take some guesses. And I like the way that you're saying that it's not a one size fits all approach. In as much as gluten is not necessarily one size fits. Some people have celiac, some people have sensitivities, and some people tolerate it just fine. And some people, famous movie actors like Rob Lowe talks about the fact that, I'm a leading man, I got an eye on my waist, so I don't eat it. But I think really from where I sit as well, and since you and I are both kind of doing similar things with very similar population, I've noticed that the question is, are there adverse consequences? Are people telling me too often that I'm not available enough or that I'm dropping the ball too often? Right. Is my doctor saying, you know what, you probably need to dial it back on that whole work thing because you're not exercising enough or your blood pressure seems awfully high? And that's kind of where I go. But does that resonate for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, if these things are getting in the way, I think we see a lot of people whose partners have told them they sort of should go therapy, and whether they want to or not is something else, but because there is something being dropped or they are noticing they're stressed out, they aren't sleeping, the partners are noticing change in behavior that they don't think is good for the person. And often that's true. So that's how we get the conversation going.
It's so important to have a great partner who's a good co-pilot, who can give us good mirroring. Yep. I miss so much about myself. And in as much as we can't see if our fly is down or if there's something hanging from our nose or a little bit of spinach on our teeth, similarly, we don't notice a lot of things. My wife has given me some really interesting feedback. And that is when I'm in nature, my entire body and face softens. And my son has said, I love it when you pick me up on Fridays in particular, because you've generally done a podcast interview and you're in an incredibly good mood. So I didn't even notice that. What you're saying, Janna, really dovetails with my own experience. I've interviewed people who have very, very high thresholds for loving work, is the best way I can describe it. Shelley Archambault, who's a former guest on the podcast and who is one of the best executives in the country, says she does not strive for work-life balance. She strives for work-life integration. She likes enjoying going for a nice long walk and having a business talk. And she likes it. And there are no apparent adverse consequences. Her children are grown up. She's not in any way leaning away from her obligations in life. It works for her. She loves it. And I work with many people who do too. And to your point of the reluctant spouse who enters therapy, this is a funny one for me because oftentimes, so often, it's almost the majority of the high achieving men I see will come in saying, I think therapy is a bunch of crap. My wife told me I have to be here. You've got 50 minutes basically to convince me that this might actually work for me. And without exception, at minute 40, they're like, yeah, I'm in. This is where I belong. And oftentimes I'll get a call. I don't know if you've ever had a theme or variation on this call from a spouse saying, listen, I don't know if it would say this, but Dr. Koretz, thank you so much for what you're doing with my spouse. I know you can't return this call, but I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. Have you ever had I don't know if you ever had a call like that, but I love those calls.
Yeah. Positive spouse feedback. Yes, we definitely get that.
Oh, so great. So great. Is there anything I haven't asked but should have asked?
Well, I think one thing that we talk a lot about for our work is, I think since you're talking about reluctance of therapy, people in general, like our culture medicalized therapy, 100%. You have to have a diagnosis to get reimbursed by insurance, and insurance covers it, which is great. But also now it's part of that medical system. You have to have these criteria to have this disorder. People understand each other based on, like, I do CBT for anxiety. I do this for this disorder, whatever. And so I think people have come to think of themselves in that way, and they come to think I don't have anxiety. That's not me. So therapy is not for me. That's for this group of people. It's not me. And what's nice about our office and our clientele is we're trying to say, you don't have to have, quote unquote, have anything or whatever, or meet some diagnosis or whatever to come to therapy and reap such great benefits from it. I think people don't understand what they're missing when they don't go to therapy, because it's not always about like fixing a problem. It's about understanding yourself better so you can be happier, live more fulfilled life, be with somebody that you care about, like be full and be happy and understand yourself. And I think people often think that they don't need that. And I disagree. I think everybody needs that. And so the way we do everything and the way we present the work that we do is in that way, where it's a lifestyle. It's like you have a stressful lifestyle. And most of our people it's a work stress, but you can also have just a stressful life existence. And that's fine. Like, come talk to us. You don't have to have goals. You don't have to have diagnosis. You don't have to think you're depressed. You don't have to do cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever. Things are popular. So they think they need this one kind of therapy, which, yeah, cognitive behavioral therapy is awesome and it helps a lot of people. And there's like 1,000 other things that we can teach you and do with you that are going to be so great. And we know so much, and we've had like so much training. And I know there are all these online therapies you can do and all this, but nothing can take the place of a trained professional in this area telling you things that you can use to make yourself happier or better or whatever that means to you, or just more complete. And so that's one thing I always like to add for anyone I'm talking to, is that the system has set it up so it feels so ingrained in this one way. It feels so heavy in a way. And that's true. And you can also come to therapy in this other way. And whether your spouse sends you or not, you can come in this other way. I'm like, have such success. I would say most of the people that come to us don't come because they necessarily are sure they have some kind of mental health issue. I mean, they're stressed out and they know that they can be anxious sometimes. They have perfectionistic tendencies or whatever, or they're unhappy in a general sense. But I think that's fine. I've never felt the need to use the diagnosis piece in that kind of way. Just people are so different.
And I love the idea of taking the piss out of legitimizing your presence in a psychotherapy relationship with some type of pathology. The only reason that somebody should go is because they have to address X, Y, and Z. And the fact is, we're humans. We have these social brains. And oftentimes we don't actually know what we're thinking until we hear ourselves in a safe environment. In as much as don't have to have a condition to go to the gym.
Right.
You don't have to have a condition to come to therapy. Although when people ask me oftentimes during my first calls, how long will this take? The answer, of course, is, we don't know. But there are 3 types on average of people I see. Guy 1 comes in saying, I have a presenting problem. Let's address this. We do it. We hit it out of the park. He goes on his own way. And I'm saying guy because about 80% of the people I see are men. And he's got my number in case he ever wants to come back and not have to reintroduce himself. Guy 2 has the same thing as guy 1, except he says, after we've hit it out of the park, I kind of want to work on a few other things. I've noticed a few other cockroaches in my home. Can we address those? We do that. Same thing happens. We address them. He goes on his way. He knows that he's got a place to come. Guy number 3 is kind of like guys number 1 and 2, but he at some point says, I've come to see this as a prevention program, an insurance policy that I live my life well. Is that okay? And I say, of course. And they end up seeing me long term, and we get all kinds of amazing results. All 3 of these guys who I've just described come by their therapeutic processes very intelligently, very honestly. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but I love the fact, Janna, and I believe you're the first person whom I've interviewed who has really, really validated this idea of therapy is not for pathologies exclusively. It's for living a good life. And I really appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah. It's one of my soapboxes. I have many, but that's one of them.
Well, my final and magical question. If somehow you had the magical powers to confer upon all people you saw, and maybe even all humanity, one insight or skill that would dramatically improve their lives, what would that skill or insight be? And how do you imagine it would improve the lives of the individual, as well as perhaps even society at large?
So I always say stop keeping score, not only because for the reasons that we all know about keeping score and why it can be difficult and not great for you, but I feel as if when you keep score, the scoreboard isn't yours, right? Because when you have your own scoreboard and you know what you're doing and you're doing things according to your own values and you're centered, you don't care about the score. You're just there doing your thing. And so I think that's an important way to look at keeping score. I mean, there's a lot of ways to talk about keeping score, but if you are checking those boxes and doing all the things and making sure you're doing them in comparison to other people and like all the things that we all do, then that's not your stuff. That's someone else's stuff. And so what is your stuff? What do you want to do? Who are you? What do you want to be up to? Right? Because when you're doing your own thing, again, you're going to be involved in that. You're going to be present. You're going to be happy. You're just not going to care. And I think as it applies to society, right? If you have happy people doing things that work for them and feel very congruent in their life, they're going to be productive. They're going to be contribute more to communities. They're going to make better connections. And that is only good for everybody for all the ways, I think. But it's hard to do that, right? That's a big ask. So
I love that so much. What a brilliant way to draw a line between two seemingly disparate entities. If we're keeping score, it probably isn't yours. I think that's spot on. Love that insight. And stop keeping score. My goodness, this whole social comparison thing, it doesn't work. What I found is I don't know if you remember that Matthew McConaughey speech when he talks about his future self, when he received the Academy Award for Best Actor. And he says he compares himself to his future self. And I try my best when I'm at my best, and I certainly endorse this for my clients, is compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to your next door neighbor, not to anybody else, and who you're wanting to become over the forthcoming weeks, months, years, etc., God willing, decades. Janna, this has been a blast. And I'm so grateful to you for sharing your wisdom and insights with my listeners. I look forward to hopefully an in-person meeting one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to chat. This is really fun and happy to come back if you need me.
Awesome. And I have a funny feeling that could happen.
Yeah.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psych. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.